German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has just returned from a three-day trip to China. Deutsche Welle correspondent Hans Brandt joins us now from Berlin. Hans, g'day. So Germany's been worried about being too dependent on Chinese goods and the Chinese market, but it also wants to keep doing business there. Did Chancellor Scholz find a new balance?
The key words here are the so-called de-risking and decoupling. Germany wants to de-risk its relationship with China, in other words, to make sure that it does not enter too many risks in dependency on Chinese goods and Chinese production. At the same time, it wants to do everything to avoid decoupling, in other words, cutting ties to China. And trying to find this balance is the problem. There was a large business delegation accompanying Chancellor Scholz on his visit, and their interest clearly is to continue investing in China. They have been doing so at record levels for the past year or so. But they are also worried about China flooding the European and global market with subsidized goods such as electric vehicles and solar panels, which they feel is an imbalance in competition, in international competition. In the end, they got very few assurances from China on these matters. There was a lot of pomp and ceremony, a lot of welcoming of Scholz and so on, a lot of time invested. But the only concrete agreement that was signed was one that concerned the export of German apples to China.
So the Chancellor was in China just as Iran attacked Israel. Did that overshadow the trip?
It was to some extent expected. There seems to have been some prior knowledge about the Iranian attack, when they would be attacking, and basically Scholz stuck to his program in China, took a little bit of time off to deal with the diplomatic fallout, with consultations with G7 nations and that sort of thing. And of course, China does have some influence in the region, especially on Tehran, on Iran, and also to some extent on some Arab states. And China shared the call for avoiding escalation in that conflict, obviously supported the United Nations Security Council on that score. But in the end, China does not want to invest very much political capital in that. It sees that as a regional conflict, which is a problem of the West and of the Western ally Israel. And it expects basically the West to solve the problem and not to get involved.
And Germany has said it hopes China can contribute to ending the war in Ukraine. And we're actually just seeing some pictures come in the last 15 minutes of more bombing of civilian areas in Ukraine and civilian deaths there. Did the Chancellor get any assurances on that issue from his Chinese counterparts?
That was probably the second most important goal of this Scholz visit, to try and get China involved in a peace process concerning Ukraine. Last time Scholz had been in China was at the end of 2022, and at that time he and Xi jointly called for, warned against the use of nuclear weapons by Russia in that conflict, and that was seen by Germany as a success of Scholz diplomacy, as it were. This time around there was nothing of the sort. There's going to be a peace conference about Ukraine in Switzerland in the summer, and Scholz did not manage to get the Chinese to agree to attend that. The Chinese simply said peace is a good idea. But in the end, China and Russia have an important relationship, which also concerns things such as dual-use goods, things like microchips that China exports to Russia that can also have a military use, not just a civilian use. And Scholz got no insurance from China that that kind of export would end. So in the end, there was a lot of handshaking, a lot of friendly faces, but very little of substance that came out of this trip.
OK, Hans Brandt reporting there from Berlin.